Today we have the review you've all been waiting for. Rumors have been floating around for months of some innovative new tech coming out, and it's finally here. Not EVA implementation approval just yet, although I don't really know whether to be hyped or not for EVA workarounds and approvals. We'll have to wait and thoroughly test that one when the time comes. But for me specifically, this release is the most hyped release of the entire year. The Gearbox Pro Series is finally here. In this video, I'll explain everything I learned from an hour-long conversation I had with the engineer behind these incredible new paddles, along with spin results, power rankings, sweet spot analysis, and thorough control rankings to see if these paddles really can stand up to the hype. So without further ado, let's dig straight into it. All four of the new Gearbox Pro Series paddles come in at a price of $274.99. Gearbox doesn't utilize coupon codes at all as a company, so if you'd like to grab one of these paddles and want to support my channel, I do have an affiliate link in the description down below, and it would mean the world to me if you would use that link if you're going to purchase one. All right, I need your full attention for this part, seriously, because by the end of this section, you will understand these new paddles inside and out. For the most part, almost all other paddles are utilizing a polypropylene honeycomb core, essentially plastic, which worked for a while until thermoforming came along. And what does plastic do when heat is applied? It breaks down. So we had this huge wave of crushed cores, delamination, and all sorts of nasty stuff, not to mention a very tinny, poppy sound off the face, which has led to some angry neighbors and a ton of cords being shut down within neighborhoods. Up until this point, Gearbox has been different. They utilize carbon fiber for their core material, and it's not a one-piece core, but long strands of carbon fiber running down the length of the paddle. When they introduced this technology with their CX line, they started to garner some attention, but overall the sweet spot was still a little tight, the spin was solid but nothing crazy, and the control was a little underwhelming. Well, in comes Raphael, their incredible engineer, who also plays at a 5.0 plus level, by the way, which is pretty damn cool. That not only is he engineering these paddles, but he's also playing at a very high level with them and getting feedback from pros to innovate further within the paddle space. What Raphael did is he added about a 1-inch pocket of space around the perimeter of the core inside of the paddle. You can see in this picture their smart dampen technology is the pocket I'm speaking of. And on my hour-long phone call with the engineer Raphael, he explained that this pocket of space is like the springs surrounding a trampoline. Imagine if a trampoline was only connected without springs, it would be extremely rigid. But when you add springs around the perimeter, it can really flow and flex. That's exactly what's happening here. Not only that, but instead of those long strands of carbon fiber being one long unit, they're now essentially 1-inch pieces of carbon fiber linked by a small round piece of rubber. In this image, you can imagine these red dots being these small pieces of rubber in between all of these linked carbon fiber strands. These smaller pieces can now flex together and help create more of that trampoline effect, and also reduce overall rigidity, which creates more dwell time, which is when the ball pockets a touch into the face on a hit, resulting in more spin, more control, better resets, and more consistency. What all this does is work in unison to give Gearbox more control over the feel of the resulting paddle. Whether that paddle is a control paddle or a power paddle, all Gearbox has to do is add carbon fiber that is more rigid to create a power paddle, or add carbon fiber that is softer and you have a control paddle. No more analyzing thickness or is this thermoformed or not. All four of these paddles look identical but play drastically different. Lastly, they utilize Raphael's engineering capabilities, and instead of applying the top sheets of carbon fiber all vertically, they actually applied carbon fiber sheets of varying thickness at all sorts of different angles. And in my experience, this really gives the paddle incredible spin no matter the angle you're hitting the ball at. Lastly, each of these technologies dampen sound and vibration. Here's a clip of me bouncing a ball on a bread and butter filth, which has a plastic polypropylene core. Here's me bouncing a ball on the new Gearbox Pro elongated power paddle. And here's me bouncing a ball on the new Gearbox Pro Control Fusion paddle. There's literally over a dozen new patent pending technologies going into these paddles, and it's all really pretty freaking awesome. Raphael was telling me the control you have with carbon fiber is immeasurably better than anything you could do with polypropylene, aka plastic. What we have here is the physics of a tennis racket incorporated into a pickleball paddle. I learned so much in that hour-long phone call. I feel like I could almost write a book on this stuff. Thank you so much for your time, Raphael. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Okay, so spec-wise, these paddles all come in at 14 millimeters thick. They all have a 4-inch grip circumference and a 5.5-inch grip length, perfect for two-handed backhands if you're that type of player. We have the Fusion paddles, both Power Fusion and Control Fusion, which will be a more standard shaped paddle with way more maneuverability. And we have the elongated paddles, both a Power elongated and Control elongated paddle, which are more power and drive oriented with higher swing weights. Speaking of swing weight, the elongated Power paddle has a swing weight of 120. The Fusion Power paddle is 113. The elongated Control is 122, and the Fusion Control is 117. So if you have tennis elbow or any sort of joint issues, I would recommend a Fusion paddle. I will say though, with all of the sound and vibrational dampening, all of these feel much better on my wrist and my elbow regardless though. As far as twist weight goes, they're all right around almost exactly 5-ish, but when I added 2 3-inch strips of lead tape to the bottom of the sides of the Fusion Power paddle, it raised it to 6.31, which really opened up the sweet spot and made it even better in my opinion. The weight of all 4 of these paddles came in right around 8 ounces in my testing. So before I tell you which of these paddles is my personal favorite, let's dive into some spin numbers. The spin for these paddles is pretty incredible. I clocked the spin of the elongated Power paddle at 2240 RPM, the Fusion Power paddle at 2189 RPM, the elongated Control paddle at 2276 RPM, and the Fusion Control paddle at 2210 RPM. So all fairly relative in my testing. Keep in mind with those carbon fiber top sheets at varying thicknesses and also applied at alternating angles, you will see much more spin on your slice shots and flick rolls than really any other paddles using only a vertical direction for their top sheets. All very close and fairly relative, and all in the highest tier of spin for any paddle I've ever tested. And the crazy thing is that when you compare these numbers to the Yola Perseus at 1796 RPM and a price point of $249, or the Selkirk 006 at 1833 RPM and a price point of $333, the Gearbox paddles are dominating the high price point category and actually following through with innovation with this new release. Not just spitting out some newly branded paddle with a couple tiny tweaks. Can you get a paddle that spins really well in the top tier category for a lower price? Absolutely, but it will have a plastic polypropylene core and it won't have the feel, sound dampening, or vibrational dampening technologies implemented here. As far as power goes, all these paddles have some insanity power. The Power paddles feel firm and put out so much power, I actually had to tone down my shots to about 70% speed. Raphael, their engineer, told me his favorite paddle is the Fusion Power paddle as it's highly maneuverable and also has some incredible power. He said that being able to abbreviate your swings and only hit them at about 70% speed and get the same output really allows you to conceal your shot choice and also gives you a major advantage at the net. All of this coupled with very top tier spin means you can keep these balls in the court while applying a ton of pressure at less energy cost for you. I gave the elongated Power paddle the highest score I've ever given to a paddle so far, a 9.7 out of 10 for power and a 9.1 for pop. I gave the Fusion Power paddle a 9.4 for power and 8.7 for pop, the elongated Control paddle a 9.1 for power and an 8.5 for pop, and the Fusion Control an 8.9 for power and an 8.5 for pop. To compare these numbers, I'll leave the elongated Power paddle on the top of the screen and compare it to the Volair Mach 1 Forza at 9.5 for power and 8.5 for pop, the Yola Perseus at 7.8 for power and 7.4 for pop, and the Selkirk Labs 006 at 8.2 for power and 7.5 for pop. You can see the elongated Power paddle is the most powerful legal paddle I've ever tested. I've actually let a few of my close buddies play with these paddles and their favorites are all across the board. My friend Jack's favorite is the elongated Power paddle. Sam's is the Fusion Control. We have a buddy Jeff and Bill who really like the elongated Control paddles. And well, mine, well, you'll have to stick around until the end of the video to learn what my favorite is. As far as sweet spot goes, the sweet spot of these paddles is pretty incredible given how thin and maneuverable they are. All this tech really shines through in practice and really does not disappoint. Off-center dinks, drives, serves, and resets all maintain their aggressive line and feel less harsh than inferior paddles. It's interesting, they have a low twist weight, but a really solid sweet spot. I think it's because they're so thin. When you take into account the tech that goes into these paddles, it sort of goes beyond a twist weight measurement in my opinion, as the core and everything that went into these paddles seems to have really paid off as far as the sweet spot goes. So for sweet spot rating, I gave the elongated power paddle an 8.9, the fusion power paddle a 9, the elongated control paddle a 9.1, and the fusion control paddle a 9.3. Tying it with the Groove and Movement 13S also at 9.3. And in comparison to the YOLO Perseus at 6.9 and the Selkirk Labs 006 at 7.2, you can see these paddles are all very consistent and top tier for sweet spot rankings. As far as control goes, this is where you'll really have to experiment. If you go for a power paddle, you'll definitely have less control than the control paddles, but there's so much tinkering you can do to really unlock these paddles' full potential. Smaller movements, 70% energy shots instead of 100% energy shots, so it's really up to you on what you want to do here, and there's really no wrong answer. I found myself struggling for a while with the power paddles, but once I really honed in on how soft I need to hit them, I started to realize how absolutely incredible they are at what they do. The control paddles are definitely control paddles though. Much more plush and forgiving, way less poppy and controllable overall. So for control rankings, I gave the elongated power paddle an 8.3, the fusion power paddle an 8.5, the elongated control paddle a 9, and the fusion control paddle a 9.5. A pretty sizable difference, which is cool seeing as they're all the same thickness and essentially the same paddles, just with varying tech inside, which again is a major props to Gearbox here. To compare that again to just the most expensive paddles in the space, we have the YOLO Perseus at 7.4 and the Selkirk Labs 006 at 7.3 for control. A pretty wild difference at relative price points. I think all things considered, this is definitely groundbreaking technology that is going to change the game for good. I think in the future, we will start seeing much more carbon fiber cores because of the variance and the customizability you can create with them. All of that coupled with sound and vibrational dampening, this just seems like a total recipe for success. If you stuck around this long and you're still wondering which paddle is my personal favorite, I'm currently torn right now between the Fusion Power and the Fusion Control paddles. I love the maneuverability of the Fusion paddles and see so many pros and cons between the two, and I'm just having a hard time choosing one. So keep in touch in the comments down below, and I'll definitely keep you updated when I make my final decision. Smash that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this, and have a freaking wonderful day.